Did you know that you can actually control reality? Better said is you can actually have way more influence over reality than you've probably been taught, because reality is actually very subject to influence. In fact, for the most part, your reality is actually waiting to change, to shift, to transform on cues that come from you. However, because so few know this, and even fewer know how to apply it consistently, the cues that they are giving off are creating a more negative reality for the individual, or at best, a mediocre one in most cases. But what if you could fashion a reality for yourself that was glorious, that you absolutely loved, where you were earning more money and doing it in a way that you actually enjoyed, where you are happy and feeling good most of the time, where you dreamed big and actually achieved these dreams? Not only is this possible, but when you learn how to influence reality, these are some of the things that start to actually be produced in your life. You see, the reality we find ourselves in, all of this around us, actually has a very particular rule set. Yet what most of us were taught is the rule set is actually something completely different than what's actually going on. Most of us are moving around like we're trying to drive on the road, but we don't actually know the rules to the road. And when you understand this, no wonder so many people's lives just seem like absolute chaos, or at best, again, just quiet desperation. So in this video, not only are we going to go over the true rules to the road of this reality, but I'll also show you how to apply them in your own life so that you're actually able to navigate this road and start driving straight to the destinations you want to experience more often. Okay, so why is it that reality is subject to influence like I mentioned in the beginning? Well, if reality was mainly physical, like many of us were taught growing up, then it probably wouldn't be subject to influence that much at all. However, it turns out that what we were taught actually isn't even close to being true. In fact, our reality is mainly non-physical and only a little bit physical. In fact, it has been shown now at this point that our reality is closer to 99.999999% empty space and energy, and only 0.000001% physical matter reality. Crazy, right? However, it has been shown that the atom, which most of us were taught is the building blocks of all the physical stuff we see, when observed under the right instruments to go deep enough, are made up of the percentage I just went over. Meaning the literal building blocks of what we call the physical are mainly comprised of empty space and energy. So our reality is less physical than we once believed. Way less physical. Even famous physicists have said the following about the nature of our reality. Here's one from Max Planck that I really love, and now from Werner Heisenberg, and here's one from Niels Bohr. All of these were some of the most brilliant minds in the last 150 years. And let's not forget Nikola Tesla with the famous quote that we've all heard at this point, which is, if you want to understand the secrets to the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Notice he doesn't say think in terms of physicality, but energy, frequency, and vibration, which all we can categorize all under the non-physical category. Now, I actually want to say that this is good news. It would appear that the idea of life happening to us rather than from us isn't the case. And that means we have influence over our lives. In fact, we have been molding our reality the whole time, just unaware that we have been doing so. Where in a Newtonian physical paradigm, you're just kind of at the mercy to natural physical laws, yet it doesn't seem that's the case at all. So now I'm going to jump into some laws and principles that show us that this is the case, but will also show you how you can start influencing your reality so more of what you want to show up starts showing up in it. Now, an amazing body of work that goes over a lot of these natural principles and laws is something that dates back to actually ancient Egypt, something that ancients knew for a very long time, and masters down the ages knew of these principles, and these are called the Hermetic principles. Now, there is the 7 Hermetic principles and 8th, if you want to get really technical, which we are going to mention, but these are amazing at explaining how our reality actually works, and when you dive deep into these principles and start to understand them, wisdom, you start to see that reality does not operate in the way that many of us have been led to believe. Again, these are principles that have been passed down through the ages, but they've been passed down in elite groups and circles that have kept this information for a long time under lock and key. We're talking about the ancient mystery schools, certain secret societies, and so on that would pass this information amongst each other down families and generations, and it hasn't really been available to the public except in maybe the last few decades or hundreds of years. And again, when I say available to the public in hundreds of years, you would have had to know what books to look for. For example, the Kabbalion was, I believe, in the early 1900s, but you had to know to go looking for it to even gain access to the information. You also had to know how to read, which again, the further we go back in history, the less people knew how to do that. More people were illiterate. I just mentioned this to emphasize how coveted this information was for most of human history, and whenever it came about. Again, we can date it back to ancient Egypt. It may have even gone further than that, but it has been coveted information that's been passed down generation to generation for a reason, because it works and it does such a good job of explaining how this reality operates, and not just in a philosophical sense, but in a way that you can apply practically to see changes in your life. So let's go over a few of them. So the first one we're going to cover is the principle of cause and effect, and I believe this is the sixth principle in Hermetic wisdom. And this is one of my favorites because this really explains and shows that our life is not mainly being influenced by what we're doing physically, but mainly by what we're doing non-physically. And so the way I want you to think about this is that you are a three-part being. Now, we all know the physical parts of ourselves. We know that there is a physical aspect to us, but again, remember that percentage I gave earlier on how much things are physical and how much things are non-physical. Again, even if we were to look at what we consider the physical part of ourselves under the right instruments, we went right down to the atoms, we would see that they're mainly empty space and energy, just really coming about in this way that appears physical. But I want you to think of yourself as that three-part being. So again, you have that physical, but I also want you to consider that you also have a mental side to you and a spiritual side to you. And all three planes of existence kind of brought together are what make up you. Now, that 99.9+% that I mentioned earlier is represented by the mental and spiritual planes of your existence, not the physical. Now, just to make this very simple, you can think of the mental plane of your existence, the thinking part of yourself. This is the mentality, this is thoughts, this is visualizations, kind of that side of you. The spiritual part you can think of in a few different ways to keep it simple. First, it is your connection to something larger, to the divine, to oneness, whatever you want to call it. And you can also consider it your emotional self. And when we say emotional self, we're talking about energy in motion. So your feelings, your emotions, remember that's energy. And so what you're doing in that realm plays a big part in your life. So those two are making up the inner world, or that 99.9+% of the non-physical, and then that physical plane is making what we can consider the outer world, the outpicturing of what's happening in the inner world. This is that, again, very tiny percentage we went over earlier. Now, here's how I want you to take a look at cause and effect from now on, instead of just a physical phenomena, because we all know cause and effect on the physical plane. You know, for example, if I punch this wall behind me, it's going to give me an equal and opposing force, right? There is an effect to the cause of punching a wall or doing something in the physical plane. If I roll a boulder down a hill, there's going to be an effect to doing that. We understand that. But what about causes and effects that happen at the higher planes, the mental and spiritual? Well, they're also in operation there. And when you understand cause and effect at that level, you'll start to see how you can start to influence your life more. Again, this is the level that activates that 99.9+%. So by focusing more on the causes at that level, you're going to start to have more influence on the effects that you're receiving. So basically, in a nutshell, to make this very simple, the causes that you activate on the spiritual and mental planes of your existence starts to create the effects that occur in your physical life. And we're going to go over a principle called correspondence to show you how all of these are connected, and also vibration. But understand that what you do on those two inner planes, the mental and spiritual, will lead to the equivalent effects that you're going to experience in the physical. Now, what does this mean, or how does this look like? Well, put very simply, if you're thinking negatively all the time, if you're thinking about things you don't want, you're in a pretty bad mental space all of the time, and usually through correspondence, that means you're going to be feeling pretty crappy, low conscious emotions, you're going to be feeling guilt, shame, fear, apathy, maybe some pride thrown in there. When you dwell in those emotions and those thoughts long enough, they create certain effects in the physical. Now, some of these effects take longer, and we'll get into this when we go over vibration, why certain things take longer, but some of these will be pretty instantaneous. For example, as we all know, when you feel pretty down or low conscious, your body language starts to change. That is a physical effect that happens pretty quickly based on what's going on in the inner world. However, over time, as you continue to dwell in certain actions or causes in the inner plane, there will be a corresponding effect that happens in the outer world. And so when you start to shift this, things begin to change. You've heard of ideas like you get what you think about most of the time. And I always like to extend that to you get what you think about and feel about all of the time, because this now activates both of those planes, the spiritual and the mental. The reason that this is true is because the causes you activate on the mental and spiritual create effects on the physical. Keep this in mind, that the outer world follows the inner. The outer world is the effects of whatever you're doing in the inner world. This is one of the biggest ways in which you create. And this is why you will almost never find someone who in the inner world is thinking negatively all of the time or most of the time, focusing in on that, feeling low conscious emotions, and maybe get some relief from time to time by going to higher conscious ones, but it's only from time to time. The majority of the time they're in those more negative emotions. This is why if you find someone like this, you will never see them living a fulfilled life. It will almost at the very best be a life of quiet desperation. They probably have a lot of drama in their life. Maybe they have a bunch of health issues, relationship issues. Financially, they're probably not doing so well as well, because in the inner world, the causes that they are creating are having corresponding effects in their physical. However, this is good news because, again, you can do it from the other end of the spectrum. If you start changing your thinking, the thoughts that you're having and entertaining, you start creating these barriers towards thoughts you don't want to think about or snapping yourself out of it, and we'll go over tools later. You start feeling better. You start feeling good. You start deliberately putting yourself in that place and doing things to remove the gunk that's causing you to feel bad. Well, suddenly you're creating these new causes that have to have corresponding effects, and things then begin to change on the physical plane. Just remember, it is that 99.9+% that makes up this reality that allows for that 0.00001% to even come out of, right? So the inner world is what's producing what will show up in the outer. And so by really getting more clear on those planes, by making them more coherent, you will start seeing more coherence in the outer world. The more inner coherence you have, the more outer coherence will start to appear. Now let's talk about another Hermetic principle, correspondence. I forget which number this is. I think number 2, but I could be wrong. But anyway, the principle of correspondence essentially is the saying, as above, so below, and as below, so above. Many of us have heard this. And what this means is when you activate one thing on one plane, there is a correspondence, a communication on all the others. This is why, for example, when you go to work out, you usually feel better. You usually start thinking more appropriately to that, right? You start thinking better. This is why when you start thinking better and you start actually thinking more positive thoughts, you might start feeling better. You might be more encouraged to take certain actions, right? So anything you do on any plane is going to have correspondence on another. And again, we can use this to our advantage, right? There are many things, for example, we can do physically to help us to elicit certain emotions or thoughts. There are many things we can do emotionally that help us to really be encouraged to take certain physical actions or to think in a certain way. And then lastly, there are certain things we can think, which will help us feel a certain way, which will help us physically as well. They are all connected and in correspondence. They are not cut off and unaware of each other. In fact, they thrive and grow and produce together. So keep in mind that what you do on one will have an effect on the other that corresponds with whatever that thing is you did. This is why, for example, if I told you, hey, I want you to think about something that was traumatic for you, and you don't have to do this, but you will notice that you feel a certain way. Here's one you can do. Think of something that you love. I want you through thoughts to think of someone or something or an event that you love. Did that change your emotions? If you stay with it even a little bit, you will notice that it will. Even right now, you can close your eyes and think of just a face of someone or a pet. That's a really good one. Think of a pet or something that you just absolutely love, a memory that you absolutely love, and how do you start to feel? You start to feel good. Does your body position and your posture physically start to change? Do you notice that you now have more energy, that maybe you want to go out and do something that's on that same wavelength? This is correspondence in action. And again, it's a very useful thing to become aware of because you can easily change your state by activating something on any of those planes of existence rather than going unconscious and just letting things happen to you. This is also why, a lot of people will do breath work. I mean, there's multiple reasons for it, but breath work's so good at helping correspondence. Ice baths is something I like because you jump into an ice bath, you get out of that thing, you feel amazing, which influences your thoughts, which influences, again, your emotions and everything else. So now you have cause and effect, and you have correspondence. I'm going to give you a few more. We're not going to go over every single principle. I just want to highlight some that can, again, give you a great blueprint to start influencing your reality powerfully. And now we're going to go over what's called rhythm and also balance. Now, in Hermetic wisdom, it's the principle of rhythm, and I'm going to throw in something called the law of balance and harmony, which harmonizes nice with this principle. Now, this is a really good one because it really plays on this idea of the pendulum swing, or the ebb and flow, the up and down, and the dualistic nature of our reality. Understanding that everything that moves has to come to rest, that everything that ebbs has to flow. And when you understand this, like for example, there's always a season to plant and there's always a season to harvest. Then there's a season for when the soil needs to rest, right? And it's the same in your own life. And it's about getting more into that natural rhythm instead of trying to push and force against the natural rhythm, which is actually going to knock you out of balance and will have to bring in a corresponding result to kind of knock you back in balance. This is why, for example, if you see people who hustle and grind a lot, they get no sleep, a lot of times something happens where it almost forces them to rest or forces them to stop what they're doing. They get burnt out. What is burnout? It is really impeding on the law of rhythm, and you're not taking that ebb and trying just to take the flow. And when you're in a good rhythm that follows this principle, you will notice that you have a ton of energy. You will notice that your thoughts, your emotions, your physicality are a lot better because you're essentially in what we could call God's rhythm. You're in this natural, kind of nature-based rhythm where you're following natural law and kind of this natural rhythm rather than going against it. It's kind of like being in a river, let's say the river of life, and it's taking you to where you need to go and to these great things, and you're trying to swim upstream. You're not in line with it. You're kind of trying to go against it and push against it. Now, you might be able to do that for a while. Maybe you'll even get some things through doing it, but eventually you're just going to get burnt out. At the end of the day, go further down the river. But we don't need to get to that point. We don't need the slap across the face to get the message. If you get into rhythm from the get-go and to really honor the natural ebbs and flows in life. This also goes with what we're talking about when it comes to the inner and outer world. A lot of people kind of mess up the rhythm by going way too much into one or the other. Again, you get a lot of people who are into hustle culture and go all out in the physical world, but then it has this corresponding kind of effect where they have a lot of problems because they do this, whether health, relationship, they burn out, spiritual crises, all of these different things. And then you have a lot of people that go all on the spiritual side, but with no substance. We call this spiritual bypassing, right? So they never actionize any of the inspiration coming through, or they're using these principles in order to avoid the things they may need to confront in their life or life is trying to bring them to. But when you get into proper rhythm, you know when to go, when to stop, you know when to ebb, when to flow. And this is going to improve your ability to create so much what you want because it's essentially having the power of the river at your back versus having it work against you. Now, I mentioned the law of balance and harmony because essentially the predominant law of the universe, one of them, is the law of balance and harmony. And this means that life is always trying to balance things out. In fact, cause and effect points this as well. For example, if you're balanced here, and let's say your inner world's here and your outer world is here, so they're balanced. The way for us to improve is actually to put ourselves out of balance so that life has to harmonize and balance at a new level. What happens for most people is they start thinking a little better, they start feeling a little better, maybe taking better action, and they start to elevate kind of their inner world to up here. And now things are out of balance. So life, through the law of balance, goes, I have to balance one way or another. But what ends up happening a lot of time for most people is they end up getting scared, they get fearful, they go take steps backwards, and they end up balancing here on this level. But again, if you just follow through, you end up rebalancing at this new level when new things start to come in. And so when you honor rhythm and the principle of rhythm and law of balance, things start to change very, very quickly. That brings us to the law or principle of vibration. And this is one that basically everyone knows who goes into this space, but everything is moving, everything is vibrating to some degree. And one thing that I know for a long time ago really clicked for me is when I saw this example, and it's to imagine that kind of everything is on this pole. And then this pole, it's kind of like all of the same thing. And at the top, you have spirit and energy. This is kind of the purest form of just everything, right? It's energy, it's spirit, it's kind of instantaneous, right? And at the bottom, you have matter. And even though these things appear incredibly different, again, matter and the physical world appears very different to the things that are non-physical, in actuality, they're the same thing. They're of a like kind, but vibrating at a different rate of vibration. And so the only difference between something we call physical and something we call non-physical is literally the rate of vibration. It is all made up of the same stuff, just at different rates of vibration. And so the higher up you go on that pole, the more non-physical it becomes, and the faster the vibration, the lower you go down to the grossest form of matter, the slower the vibration and the more physical it appears as a result, because they're vibrating in place very slowly, and it gives this appearance of physicality. Understanding this will also give you more context in how actually most of it is non-physical, and why when we look at physical stuff and we look at it at its core, it's mainly empty space and energy that's just vibrating very densely to give the appearance of physicality. And one thing I want you to take away from that, or I would invite you to take away from that, is the true malleability and changeability of life, which includes the physical. You can change things in your physical life pretty quickly when you stick to these principles and keep using them. And again, like we mentioned in cause and effect, start creating new causes or activating causes that create new effects in your life. The last of these principles I want to mention is a little known one. It's sometimes considered the 8th principle of Hermetic wisdom, and it is called the principle of care. And this is essentially a way of saying what you put your attention on is going to grow. Your attention, your focus, your intention is way more powerful than you've been led to believe. And we're not going to be able to cover all of that in this video because we're already getting there in length, but you'll know I go over this in other videos. What you actually focus on as a conscious being and give your attention, give your light to, give the light of your attention to, creates expansion. It creates and proliferates whatever you're focusing on. And so the principle of care states this, that basically what you're giving your attention to, what you actually care about enough to focus like a laser beam on, is what's going to grow in your life. This is why if you actually focus in on positive thoughts and being positive and feeling good most of the time, it starts creating the like kind of that in your physical world. You start planting those seeds, you care for the seeds, this is one way to think about it, they start bearing the fruit that you actually want of in your life. Now again, the physical stuff does take longer because like I mentioned in the principle of vibration, it's a dense rate of vibration. So it takes a little bit longer for energy to kind of coalesce and kind of do that to be in this denser rate of vibration, where when you get to the top of the pole, it's all just instantaneous and quick and, faster than we could possibly imagine, beyond the speed of light even, right? Into the non-physical realm. However, if you focus that particle flow and care for something enough to keep your focus there, it starts to be produced in your life. All right, so those are some things to chew on that are some incredibly powerful principles. A lot of this is also backed up by science. I didn't go into all of the data in this video. I have gone into it to an extent in other videos if you want to look into it. But again, just to reiterate, this is wisdom, Hermetic wisdom, and from other sources as well, that was passed down for thousands of years. Again, by elites in secret circles. It was coveted. It was hidden by certain people. I'm not saying that's right. I don't think it is, but it was for a very long time, for a reason, because it was that valuable and does unlock freedom so that you can start to create. One thing to recognize also about these principles, they are operating in your life 24/7, regardless of whether you acknowledge them or not, believe in them or not. And so in my eyes, it really behooves us to learn what they are and to start learning how to move in a way that benefits us, rather than it just operating in the background kind of willy-nilly, just throwing you in a million directions. Now, having this awareness is great and an important first step, but now we actually need to actionize them and know how to practically use them to create the effects we're looking for in our life. Now, what we went over just previously, going over them, I did kind of layer in some things that you can do, but let's go over some deliberate techniques and practices you can engage in that are going to help you to activate these in your life powerfully. And when you do this, it's like now you know the rules to the road, the actual rules. You can finally turn the steering wheel and head in the direction you've been wanting to head in the whole time. But how can you head in that direction if you didn't know the rules? Now you know them, or at least you've been given a taste of them and you kind of are aware of them now. So let's learn them at a deeper level and actually apply them. So keep in mind that the outer follows the inner. So we need to give more focus to what we're doing in the inner world. Remember what we talked about earlier. So what are some ways we can do that? Now the first one is called the mental diet and something that's called energetic transference. You see, you are being influenced 24/7 by those things in your environment around you. They have a certain energetic transference, and the way you can think of that is some things are basically vibrating at a higher level of consciousness and some things at a lower. Now we want to expose ourselves to the things that are at a higher level of consciousness. This is what's going to influence your life and your reality in the ways that you want. Because you're in something that's called infinite action. This is something that Manly P. Hall wrote about, who was a Freemason, and essentially he became a 33rd degree Freemason, I should say, so it's one of the highest, at least public designations in that order you can get. And he went over this idea of infinite action that they were taught as he was going through this. And his initial idea was he's going to get to being a 33rd degree so he could share a lot of the secrets. His books, like the Secrets of All Ages, I think that's the correct title, by Manly P. Hall, Initiates of the Flame. There's a lot of great stuff you can look up by him. But he talks about this idea of infinite action. And this is the idea, guys, that you're always sending out a signal. If we go back to that three-part being we talked about, think of the culmination of everything you're doing on all three of those planes, sending out a certain energetic transference or signature 24/7. And you're receiving back whatever that transference or signature is. And so the mental diet is so crucial in what you have in your environment because that's influencing the signal you're putting out. The more powerful and high conscious this signal, the better that you receive back. The kind of crappier and junkier this signal, the worse that you receive back. And I'll let you know, most people are sending out pretty junky signals, and that's why they're receiving junk back. And their lives look the way that they do. They're unfulfilling. They're not too happy with it, or maybe again, it's mediocre. And so if you want one where it's fulfilled and more of what you want in your life, we need to really work on having that signal automatically in those unconscious moments especially benefit you rather than hinder you. So the big thing to look at is what are you consuming, informationally especially, and energetically on that mental and spiritual plane of existence, right? So this means, what are you watching? Understanding that what you're watching isn't just some redundant thing or it doesn't have an impact. In fact, so many people are influenced by the TV programming that they're watching, the videos they're watching online, even what you're reading, you are consuming that. All of it has an energetic transference. It's causing you to think in a certain way, feel in a certain way, has a certain, again, transference at a certain level of consciousness that is influencing the signal you're sending out. Now, this might sound like bad news because you're like, oh, all these things around me that can influence me, but it's in fact very good because we're in a day and age that's very much a double-edged sword when it comes to this. The double-edged sword is there is so much media and so many things, and the vast majority of it is definitely negatively swayed and isn't going to benefit you. But the upside and the good side of that sword, I guess, is that you can, if you're being intentional, have access to all of these things that can influence you in a very positive way and can almost brainwash yourself into the positive outcomes you're looking for. And this is through watching certain media that calibrates high. It's, getting coaching and mentoring, which you have access to now in the biggest way ever in history, I think, reading really, really good books and just making sure what you're consuming mentally, digitally, is very, very high quality. Really making sure your digital environment, your physical environment is helping you and serving you rather than hindering you and making you regress. And again, the more you do this, the more you're going to start creating effects from these causes. I can give you some of what I like to do every single day. I'm reading in some capacity every single day, very particular books I know at a high level. Even if I read it before, I'm going back through it because it's not just the information, even though that's valuable, it's that whenever I'm reading that book, the energetic transference and effect that it's having on me is positive and is really calibrating those inner planes of existence for me. So I could go through a book 20 times, I will still read it if it's a high conscious book, not only to reiterate and really learn the material at higher and deeper layers and levels, but again, every time I engage in that book, I'm getting that influence or energetic transference. Same with certain movies. There's very few movies that are highly calibrated but they are out there, and you can watch them multiple times and have that effect. Social media is very, very crucial. Videos like this can be beneficial. I certainly hope so. But again, you got to be careful not to be distracted away into other videos that are going to be detrimental, because again, a lot of what's out there is going to calibrate at different energies. And you can just look at it and be like, is this a video from pride? Is this a video from anger? Is this a video from fear? Is this a video from guilt and shame? You know, what is the energetic transference of it? Is it one of inspiration? Is it one of willingness and acceptance and wisdom and love and joy? Well, then that's going to influence you in a great way. But you got to be disciplined to try and keep your attention mainly on those. And again, have a mental diet. In the same way, if you wanted to have a physical food diet, you have to throw out the junk. You have to throw out the things that are preventing you from getting to your goals physically. It's the same mentally and spiritually. Now, the next thing to keep in mind is action from a higher place. When you start to do this, you will absolutely be inspired and compelled to move. Again, when we get into this imbalanced, lack of rhythm place, there are the hustlers and grinders who just want to push through everything. That's not the right way either. It's not right or wrong, I should say, but it's usually going to come with a lot of problems. But the other side of that spectrum is I'm just going to try and watch all this and be influenced and never take action. You see, when you do this correctly, you will be compelled and inspired to take action. You will be like thrown into movement, but you still have to make the choice to do it. Things will pop up for you that feel like good ideas because they probably are. You then have to take those actions. This also means you'll start feeling out rhythm, like when is it time to rest and when is it time to take action. There'll be some times where it's like, yeah, absolutely right now the time is to rest. That's what feels good. And you know, there's maybe these actions I think I should do because I feel obligated but wouldn't be beneficial. And then there'll be other times where maybe your nervous system wants you to rest because it's used to comfort, but your heart or that deeper place, that inner place, is like, no, we need to go take this action. This is so exciting. I want to go do this. So again, as you start to do this, you will be compelled into action, but it's not going to be any kind of action. It'll be aligned action, meaning by taking it, you're going to move further down the path you actually want to go. Again, with the real rules to the road, now driving towards the destination you actually want to go to. The next thing that is so crucial is to have an actual aim. When you're aimless, you'll just be thrown anywhere. And typically when you don't have your own aim, you know, a company or, you know, a family member or someone else will kind of inadvertently or quite directly give you an aim, and now suddenly someone else is choosing your direction. Not having an aim is like trying to throw a dart at a dartboard, but the dartboard is never there. And so no wonder not much begins to happen. But when you have an aim, you suddenly now have a dart you can throw at the dartboard, and when you start doing other things, it's like you're moving closer to the dartboard, making it more likely you can hit the bullseye. Now, this is such a crucial component of this if you want to be able to, again, create your reality powerfully, that at the end, I'm going to link to another video that will show you exactly how to do this, how to create an aim that's aligned with you, a dream, a DCA, and some other things that we'll go over. And when you have this and you follow what we've been going over here, it allows you to directly go for that in a very aligned way that activates cause and effect, the law of vibration and everything else we went over, and again, keeps you from being distracted away from what it is you actually want. Remember, you are a powerful creator, but you have to actually aim and declare what it is you're going to create, or else you're not going to be able to move in that direction. Again, you don't need to know this right away, but you need to be open to the ideas coming through, and when you find what that is, have that direction and move towards it. Now, like I mentioned, a huge thing is going to be your mental diet, and what I really recommend is you expose yourself to these principles and laws often, not just for the information, but the energetic transference. But as far as the information is concerned, when you get to the point when you can memorize these and you can recall them in real time right away, that's when you're going to be able to create so powerfully, because they're going to be in the forefront of your mind and you get what you think about and feel about most of the time. And so one thing I'm going to give you as an additional bonus to help you is I have an email list where I'm going to be emailing out once or twice a week, giving some more tips on how to create a reality, where we go deeper into some of these things that we're talking about here, how to apply them, different tools and techniques, things that I can't share on YouTube as well. You can join that through the first link in the description down below. It's going to help expose you to this more, and again, create a mental diet that actually serves you. Now, beyond that too, after joining that, I recommend you go watching this video next. It's the one I just promised that's going to help you have an aim. Seriously, if you don't have an aim, this almost all falls apart. It's like being at sea with no direction and the waves just throwing you around, rather than having a captain and crew that are going straight for whatever it is you actually want.